Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. My name's Tim Hannon.
And I'm Steve Wirt.
And for those of you that may be unfamiliar with this podcast, we're two lifelong Pittsburgh sports fans. And every episode, we sort of take a deep dive into some memorable event in Pittsburgh sports history and discuss it. This week's topic that we're going to deep dive into is the 2008-09 Pittsburgh Penguins season that ended with the Stanley Cup. As we really get into that season, the 2008-2009 season, let's start a few years earlier. So the Penguins, going back to the 1990s, have this really strong decade of hockey, and at the end of the decade, they declare bankruptcy. Mario Lemieux comes in and buys the team and saves it. But eventually, in the early part of the 2000s, the financial issues kind of catch up with them. They also badly need a new arena. They're playing in the league's oldest building in the Civic Arena, and they have to start sort of selling off parts of the team. They trade Jaromir Jagr, who was their best player, and they go through this stretch in the early 2000s of just some miserable seasons. Steve, what do you remember about those seasons?
Yeah, they were pretty bad. And the Penguins, Mario's whole thing with buying the team was he signed a rather large, superstar contract with Howard Baldwin, and he never really got paid on that because Howard Baldwin didn't have the money that he promised him. So it was kind of like one of those deals. Well, I don't have any money, but I can give you the team. So Mario took the team kind of in a trade to satisfy this contract where he really never got paid. And as to the arena, the Civic Arena was built as an opera house with a retractable roof, and they filled the fish that saved Pittsburgh, which is a classic Jonathan Winters Dr. J vehicle, if you love basketball movies. And I do remember going to a game before it teared down. I went to more than one game, but I remember one time I sat in sea level, and those tickets were expensive. They weren't cheap, and I was in the end, and to see the other end because of the way the overhang was, you would have to stand up. And you kept wondering why people stand up after the first time. You're like, what's going on? And you're like, oh yeah, you can't see unless you stand up. So the Civic Arena was badly suited for hockey. The new arena, the console, is much better to watch a hockey game. And they had the Howard Baldwin seats, they used to call them. Remember, way at the top.
Section F. I had season. So during that era,
I had
season tickets.
I've sat up there. Yeah, I've sat up. I mean, you felt like you're taking your life in your hands.
Yes.
I mean,
you felt like you were going to fall off.
Yeah, it was, and that's why they could never retract the roof either. Remember, because it was in the way.
They were tied to the roof.
Yeah.
So the fact that every NHL team had a new building built since the Civic Arena was built, every single NHL team had gotten a new arena in that time frame.
Yeah, and what also had happened was the city had built Heinz Field and PNC Park in that time period, and there was a strong backlash because I don't think people minded them building it. They just didn't want them to use public money to do it, and so there were some political things. So they didn't. The mayor and such didn't stand up to necessarily the Steelers and the Pirates the way they did the Penguins. And I'm not sure if that was just, in Pittsburgh, you got to understand it's very parochial. And I've been here a long time, but my parents weren't from Pittsburgh. They grew up in Harrisburg, and they are still 40, 50 years, still not, it's like you got to be here a couple of generations before some of the locals consider you a true local. Right. So there might have been some of that going on towards poor Mario. So that was the difficulties. And like you said, they got rid of Jagr. But a good thing happened in hockey. Hockey kind of went through this. Hockey's always been behind basketball, I would say, as far as on the sports pecking order. And they were always more of a regional. And they had a large expansion of 20 teams. And so finally, they figured out that they couldn't just kowtow to. They have teams called the Original Six, which is the Rangers, Canadians, Maple Leafs, Blackhawks,
Bruins.
Yeah. So those are kind of the original teams that make the money and have solid fan bases, whereas the Penguins and the Flyers and the Blues, and they were in the expansion of 67. They were kind of the Johnny-come-latelys and then the other. So what had happened was there was this economic disparity, like there is much in baseball, was you negotiate your TV contract, and the Rangers and those teams get large TV contracts and can sign top-name players, and teams like the Penguins and that don't have as big a TV markets fall behind because you don't have the money to compete. It's much like it is in baseball. So what happened is now not like in baseball is hockey didn't, back then there was high def TV, probably not quite there yet. They didn't have quite the TV ratings and TV fan base. It was more of hockey is totally different if you go. It's a much better game viewed in person than it is on TV. And so that was kind of playing into it. So in 2005, the owners and the decided they couldn't, continue. They were going to lose the league, and they had a lockout for a whole season.
Yeah,
they lost a whole. They are the only professional sports to lose a whole
entire season. Yeah.
And come back. I mean, yeah.
True.
Yeah.
True. But like you said, it was necessary, especially for teams like the Penguins.
Well, I would say, the Penguins, and I don't know about the Flyers, but I would imagine the Flyers might be in that boat. Tampa Bay,
Right. And
I forgot Detroit.
Detroit was an original 6 too. Yeah. But you're right. The after the lockout, they instituted a salary cap.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that really benefited the Penguins was they instituted a bunch of rule changes that favored offense.
Yeah, well, they were trying to get TV, ratings up. Like ESPN had kind of cut them, or they might have been on Versus. In the whatever Versus is now, the NBC network.
Yes.
But yeah, it was. But much like in 1984 when they won the Mario Lemieux lottery, they sent our lucky charm Craig Patrick up to the draft, and Lord knows in 2005 he came up aces again and got us Crosby.
Yeah.
What a lucky charm, huh? Crosby and Lemieux.
That was very unique because the Penguins, they stunk, so they always had a high draft pick, and they really
but they had a lottery. It was a total lottery system, because there was no 2005 season.
Right. So what do you do? Right. There was no 04-05 season. So now you can't just give the first pick to the team that stunk the previous 2 years ago because there was no season. So they did a lottery, but they did weight it where the bad teams from the 04 season had a better chance. So the Penguins had a better chance, but literally
he could have went to Toronto.
He could have went to any team.
Yeah.
And Crosby, like Lemieux, like Connor McDavid, like Wayne Gretzky, was a once in a generation talent. Every probably I'd say in hockey every dozen years or so you get those guys. Eric Lindros was one of those guys too, although he didn't quite pan out as well as the other guys I mentioned. But every once in a while you get that once in a generational player. And the draft, whoever gets that guy, it's going to be a huge deal. And so I think that was the other reason they had the lottery that year. I'm not sure they would have had the league-wide lottery had a player like that not been the consensus number one overall pick. If it would have been a couple years later and you would have had a smattering of guys, maybe they don't do that. But because Crosby was going to be this once-in-a-lifetime player, they had that. And amazingly, the Penguins' ball came up at the end, and they were the ones that got Crosby, and that really changed everything.
Yeah, and the Penguins had drafted Malkin and Fleury the 2 years before, but then Malkin was stuck in Russia for a year or two because they wouldn't pay the KHL enough money to ransom him out of Russia. So,
but you had you had Fleury, Malkin,
which is kind of Russian. What do you think?
They
just pay the Russian.
Just pay him.
Yeah.
They drafted Jordan Staal the next year, and by that point, they had fired Craig Patrick and they'd brought in Ray Shero as the GM. And Shero's model was a 3-center team, deep offense. So you had Crosby, Malkin, and Staal were the 3 centers, and Shero figured I could just build around those 3 centers. I have my goalie. They had drafted Chris Letang. They had some young defensemen. It was a very, very young team. Guys, Crosby was 18 when he came into the league. All these guys were late teenagers, early 20s. But there was certainly a lot of excitement. And it really turned things around. You went from this miserable time that we talked about going to these games and seeing them lose all the time to they started selling out. 2007, they started a streak of sellouts that's still active to this day. In fact, they just recently celebrated their 600th straight sellout.
That's impressive.
So 600 straight sellouts since 2007.
And they had that one year in there where like Mario was still on his second return. And I think Mario wanted to just, okay, let's go for it one last time. And that's kind of what Craig Patrick fought. Like they signed a bunch of like, I heard John LeClaire playing with Crosby. Like that team, it was a bunch of old guys in Crosby, and it was.
So here's the first season after the lockout was 05-06, and you're right. They signed Ziggy Palffy, John LeClaire. They signed these veterans to try to make a run. It did not go well, and
I didn't even make the playoffs.
They didn't make the playoffs. Patrick got fired, and Eddie Olczyk got fired, the coach. And so then in 06-07, they brought in Michel Therrien, who had coached the AHL team. And they thought now Michel Therrien was a disciplinarian. He was not a player's coach. He was hardcore. And they thought with a bunch of young guys, we need somebody that's going to, to sort of be a drill sergeant with them. And it worked. In 07, they made the playoffs.
They lost in 5 to Ottawa.
Yeah,
they probably just too young, not quite.
It was
ready.
a quick exit. I don't think anybody was upset about that. It was a young team, their first time in the playoffs. And you thought, okay, as long as they show improvement after this, we're going in the right direction. So the next season, the 07-08 season, they're back in the playoffs, and this time they just storm their way through the Eastern Conference. I've never seen a playoff set of series like this. They beat the Senators in a sweep in 4 games, and in the next 2 series against the Rangers and Flyers, they went up 3-0 in both those series, lost Game 4 and won Game 5. So literally, they make it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, losing only 2 games, and both of those games were after 3-0 series leads. So they had zero adversity. They never were down in a series. They were never even close to on the brink of a series. They just stormed their way through the Eastern Conference with this young team, and there's so much excitement. You're thinking, oh my gosh, they're in the Stanley Cup Finals already. It was sort of beyond what you would have expected from that group. And you're just thinking this could be another dynasty.
Yeah, and then they ran into a really good Detroit Red Wings team, and unfortunately they now were those first 2 games in Detroit? Was it that
the first 2 games that year were in Detroit?
Yeah, and that they probably weren't quite ready. Once again, it's kind of like the theme of this is they steady improvement in the team maturing. And they probably maybe not mature. You can't, what's the statistic? If you lose the first 2, there's not many teams that have won that. But don't worry, we'll fix that next year.
Detroit was a veteran team. They had won a handful of Stanley Cups already. They were just a veteran team. They were way better than us. I mean, there's no other way to say it.
Yeah.
It was a 6-game series. It was sort of almost fortunate that it went 6 games. We had won Game 5 in triple overtime just to keep things alive.
That was the Peter Sikora.
Peter Sikora called
we're eating Domino's because the owner owned Little Caesar.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so, and I think the thing that really hurt was Game 6 when they won the Cup was at the Mellon Arena, and so they hoisted the Stanley Cup on our home ice, and so that was sort of a sad end of that season because watching them raise the Stanley Cup. And so now, okay, tough loss. We go into the offseason, and the Pens lose a couple of players. They lose Gary Roberts and Ryan Malone in free agency. Ryan Malone was a tough one. He was a local kid who was really instrumental in that 2008 run. But the big story of the offseason was Marian Hossa. And Marian Hossa was a guy that at the 2008 trade deadline, they gave up a lot for. They gave up a first-round pick. They gave up a few other players, good players like Colby Armstrong, to get Marian Hossa to go all in to make this playoff run. And Marian Hossa is a big reason why, again, they stormed their way through the conference. And so now Marian Hossa was a rental player. And so originally you're thinking, okay, well, he's a free agent. He had this great postseason. Somebody's gonna pay him. Some terrible last place team is gonna pay him $1 gazillion and he'll be gone. But Marian Hossa didn't want $1 gazillion. Marian Hossa wanted to win a Stanley Cup, which in any other situation we'd all think would be really admirable, because it's against the grain of your typical stereotypical athlete. This guy didn't care about making the most money. He wanted to go to the place where he had the best chance to win, and he narrowed his two choices down to staying with Pittsburgh or going to Detroit, the team that had just beaten us, and he went to Detroit.
Yeah, and Marion probably maybe regrets that decision in hindsight. I'm not sure, but maybe he saw something he didn't like Terry, and I don't know. But definitely he went to Detroit and became a villain in Pittsburgh.
I have his quote here. The day he signed with Detroit, he said, "Pittsburgh has a great team, great people, great organization. I had to compare the two teams, and there's a little better chance to win the cup in Detroit. I had a great time with Sid and Gino, but the team in Detroit is something special." So that was sort of a knife in the gut. I mean, imagine when the Steelers lost that Super Bowl to the Packers, if, 2 weeks later, Troy Polamalu would have went and signed with the Packers and said, I think they're a better team and they're just more special.
Yeah.
It was just painful. It was like, boy, we lost, and this guy leaves us for Detroit. And again, like I said, if you're not a Penguins fan, good for him. He wanted to win a cup. He turned down potentially more money to go to a place where he really thought he had the best chance. But as a Penguin fan, that was painful.
Yeah, it's probably one of the bigger free agent defections in Pittsburgh sports history.
It really was. And again, if he signs with the last place, Arizona Coyotes or whatever,
goes back to Atlanta.
Yeah, right. Okay, fine. You sort of expected that. But going to Detroit just, and so now you're going into the next season, and now Detroit just won the cup, and they just got one of the best players in the league from you. Nevertheless, going into the season, there's certainly still lots of optimism. If you look at the preseason picks that year, a lot of people picked the Penguins to represent the Eastern Conference in the finals again. The team also inked Michel Therrien into a new 3-year contract, rewarding him for the really good, steady year-by-year improvement that he had shown. And the Penguins renewed 99% of their season ticket sales from the previous year. So again, attendance is good. They had also, I don't know if we mentioned this, but they had also, during that previous season, made a deal to stay in Pittsburgh. So the long-term future was good. The short-term future was good. It was still an exciting time to be a Penguins.
Yeah, because they were threatening to leave the Kansas City.
Right. I don't know how real that threat was. And
I think it was negotiating with some governor that may or may not be an Eagles fan. I'm sure he negotiated with the Flyers like he did with the Penguins.
Right.
Ed Rendell. What a joker.
There was a lot, but I mean, it was so nice to be done with that. It was like, okay, no more arena issues, no more we're in the financial tank issues. Things were really turning around. You could just focus on enjoying this good young team. And before the season, there was this kind of famous commercial that came out, and the commercial was an NHL commercial, and it was footage of the last couple seconds of Game 6 against the Red Wings, and you see the Red Wings celebrating and hoisting the cup, and you see a still shot of Sidney Crosby sort of standing by the bench watching Detroit raise the cup. And in this commercial, Crosby steps out of what is a still shot, a still picture, and he steps literally out of the frame, and he looks at the camera, and he says, "I never want to be in this picture again." And it ended up being such a, it was kind of an interesting commercial at the time, but it's interesting later how important that would become, because sure enough, he would be right back in that same potential spot again a year later. So the season starts, the Penguins open up strong. They open the season 12-4-3. So again, you're just thinking, okay, they're just going to cruise into the playoffs again. And then around December, January, which is sort of that time frame when everybody's still kind of paying attention to football and you're just kind of going along with hockey, things really start to go south for the Penguins. And by the time we get to the All-Star break, it's the Penguins are 23, 21, and 4, and they're in 10th place in the Eastern Conference, which it means that they're out of the playoffs. And that was pretty shocking. They had a good start to the season, and they had this great season beforehand. And again, you're just expecting steady improvement, and now the bottom falls out. They did have injuries. I think that was part of it. Sergei Gonchar had gotten hurt in their first preseason game, and he missed the first 4 months of the season. So that certainly hurt. But they just weren't playing up to expectations, and there could be a lot of reasons why. It could have been the fatigue of the long playoff run the year before, although again, they had a lot of short series that previous year. And it also could have been that the coaching was starting to wear on them.
Yeah, Therrien, like you said, is a disciplinarian, and for some reason in hockey, it seems like unlike other sports like football or even collegiate sports like basketball, there's not a longevity there. I mean, besides Lindy Rupp, I can't explain him, but there seems to be a shelf life, and if the message wears off, or maybe it's just it's more of a creative process on the ice where just having a strict system doesn't play as well, and he was definitely a strict disciplinarian, the infamous Suff, our defense Suff, they don't like, and apparently there was he cussed out everybody in bilingual. So if you were French or spoke French or English, you got the picture, I guess. I'm not sure how you drop curse words in French, but I guess Marc-Andre Fleury got the hint, him and Letang. But I don't know what the Russians players thought, but
I'm sure they
Gonchar passed it along to Malkin,
Yeah, and you're right. The press conference will always be remembered for Therrien is it was a few seasons previous to this one, but where he went up after the game and he just trashed the entire team, and he said the defensemen were soft. He said that these guys they really don't want to win.
Well, didn't he threaten to give them 50% of their pay or something? Yeah. If you only go 50. Yeah.
I mean, he was very like the way you would imagine a Vince Lombardi or Paul Brown.
Yeah.
But in this era, when the athletes make millions of dollars, it's a fine line to walk. And when you have 18-year-olds, that might work for a while, and eventually it's going to wear thin.
People tune you out. Yeah, and that's probably what started to happen to Therrien. Although I've heard Mark Madden, who's a local journalist and radio host, who's probably the best hockey person if you're looking to learn about hockey, said that he's the best turnaround coach in hockey. And I think that's evidenced by this. It's just his message wore off, and unfortunately the Penguins had to make a change.
Yeah. So on Valentine's Day, they're playing in Toronto. They are ahead, and then Toronto scores 5 third-period goals to win the game, and that's kind of the last straw. So the next day they fire Therrien, and they replace him with a guy named Dan Bylsma, who, like Therrien, when he got hired, is the coach of the Penguins AHL affiliate in Wilkes-Barre Scranton. And so they hire him on an interim basis. And he is sort of the opposite of Therrien. He's young. He had actually was not that far removed from being a player. He had played for Anaheim when Anaheim made it to the 2003 Stanley Cup Finals, and this was 2009. So he was not that far removed from even being a player. So he's pretty young, and he's a player's coach. And it's funny because this is the same time frame when the Steelers across town had hired Mike Tomlin, who was also a young coach. So it's kind of the trend to bring in these young coaches. They related better to the players. So that's what they did. Now he was an interim coach, so he wasn't necessarily going to be the long-term solution at the time. But they definitely needed a change.
Yeah, and I think they did lose even under him they lost was it the Islanders? I think they did lose their first game with him because I remember that game. Yeah. Thinking, well, we'll see what this guy, and then it was like, well, I kind of lost faith at that point. I thought, well, maybe the Penguins are kind of done here for this year.
Yeah, it felt like a lost season, and then Bylsma came in, and for whatever reason, they start winning. They start piling up wins, and he actually he goes 18-3-4. Which is pretty good, pretty much losing only 3 times outright in 25 games.
And they had to even make the playoffs. They had to go on this like incredible hot streak. And now players are coming back. Gonchar comes back, which it's a big thing for the defense. So
Yes.
and he's a leader in the locker room, and he's a good player. So that helped. And then we're having at the deadline they acquired Bill Guerin. So they got more veteran presence. And Chris Kunitz, who's one of my favorite players, a guy that could go and get the puck for Crosby and dig in the corners and probably, provide some toughness and forechecking. So that kind of played into what Bouwsma was aggressive, whereas Terrien seemed to be more, they would play back more. And I think Bouwsma was more forechecking and being aggressive.
Yeah, and those were two like gritty players too. They like needed some grit. And Guerin especially, what everybody in Pittsburgh remembered him, he was playing for the Islanders at the time that they traded for him. But his real productive years were in New Jersey on those 90s Devils team that some people would argue kind of ruined hockey for a while. But that was where he sort of made his name on those defense first kind of gritty Devils teams. And he was 38 years old at the time. But like you said, Steve, veteran presence, they were such a young team.
He
They
kind of
needed
took
that.
Gary Roberts' place
Yes.
from the year before.
Yeah, good point.
So, yeah.
Right. So they pick up some guys at the deadline. They finish with 99 points. That's good for fourth place in the Eastern Conference. If Evgeny Malkin, that was his sort of breakout season, he wins the Art Ross Trophy, leading the league in scoring. So now they're going into the playoffs. They are, again, the 4th seed, playing the 5th seed in the first round. The 5th seed is none other than the Philadelphia Flyers, the team that they had beaten in the conference finals the year before, and, of course, their biggest rivals.
Yeah, and Philly always, outside of the year before, Philly seemed to have the Penguins' number a lot. They had not beaten the Flyers a lot in the playoffs. And, the Flyers definitely have a certain style, that might be considered very aggressive, and but that's how they roll over there in Philadelphia, and they seem to like it over there, and good for them.
Yeah, I mean, let's just be blunt here. The Flyers are scum, and
Well, they're not above gooning it up a little bit there.
And look, like we live in a day and age where there's a lot of divisiveness in this country, and I'm always a big proponent of let's sit down with people that maybe have different backgrounds or political beliefs than you do.
But you won't sit down with a Flyers fan?
Well, because there's nothing redeeming there. Let's just be honest. There's nothing redeeming.
But another great Mark Madden quote about the Flyers is they serve red meat to cannibals, which I always thought was hilarious.
I mean, I don't see what's redeeming about rooting for a team whose goal has been to turn a sport that I really love into like a game of Street Fighter 2. So, yeah, I don't like the Flyers, and a lot of other Penguins fans
If you
don't
can't beat
either.
them in the rink, beat them in the alley.
Yeah, and that was the Flyers, and that's why they haven't won a cup for.
I think
for
that was actually
40
Campbell.
plus years.
That was one of the Campbells said that when he coached for one of the Canadian teams.
So now we're playing the Flyers in the first round. Like you said, despite the win the year before, there is the Penguins don't have a good history here. But this series, so there's two memorable things about this series, and both of them are very, very Philadelphia Flyer-esque. The first is Game 2 goes into overtime, and if you've ever watched playoff hockey overtime, the referees swallow is an understatement with their whistles. I mean, they take a shovel and they bury their whistles underneath the
You'd
ice.
have to commit a felony.
You have to commit a felony. And the Flyers somehow get called for 2 penalties at the same like they actually go into the Penguins get a 5-on-3 in overtime.
It still took them a minute to score, if I remember correct. It's still like 5-on-3. It still took them like forever to score on that power play.
It did. But they did. Bill Guerin got the game winner, a 5-on-3. I was watching that game in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, in a bar, and I jumped up and screamed, and then looked around the bar, and everybody.
It was all Flyers fans.
Yeah, I realized I was not in friendly territory, and I just sort of wobbled my way out. But that was Game 2, and then so the Penguins actually went up 3-1 in this series, and you're thinking, oh good, another short series. We're going to put them away. Well, the Flyers storm back in Game 5, and then Game 6 is in Philadelphia, and they go up 3-0 early in the game. Into the second period, they're up 3-0, and now as a Penguin fan, you're starting to get panicked.
Yeah, Game 7, who knows what happens?
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, so you're already thinking Game 6 is over. It's 3-0, and so now all the momentum has completely shifted back to the Flyers, and as it's 3-0, Max Talbot, who ends up being a pretty key player in this whole 2009 run for the Penguins, he picks a fight with Daniel Carcillo on the Flyers, who was one of their many, many goons. And at this point in the game, 3-0, there is zero upside to Carcillo fighting. Zero. There's upside for the Penguins.
But he's a Flyer.
That's what it is. I mean, Bobby Clark is up there.
Does a tiger change its stripes?
Slow clapping, because that's what they do. There's zero upside. Carcillo fights him. It fires up all the Penguins. Talbot's being escorted off the ice.
Well, they would have said, if you watch the fight, like Carcillo really does hand him his life.
Oh yeah, Carcillo. Carcillo
him
won the fight, which is all that the Flyers cared about. But that's not what mattered. It's not like Talbot got into a fight. Talbot got into a fight to try to fire up the team, and it worked. And as they're escorting Talbot off the ice, and all the fans are yelling at him, he puts his finger to his mouth and makes the sign. And that, honestly, that should be a statue. That should be a statue
right
outside.
beside the Mario statue.
It should be. It should be a statue right beside the Mario statue outside of the arena. And after that, the Penguins storm back. They score the next 4 goals. They take a 4-3 lead. And then the most beautiful thing at the end of that game, the Flyers pull their goalie, and it's 87 that scores the empty netter to end their season. And their fans are so angry, and because they if there's anybody they hate more than anyone in the world, it's Sidney Crosby, and he ends their season on an empty net goal. So right then and there, that series, I mean, that was almost enough to make the whole season worthwhile, just knocking out Philly in that fashion.
So we're on to round 2 versus the Washington Capitals.
And why is that a big deal, Steve? Who plays for the Capitals?
I have a theory, and it's kind of an overarching theory. There's certain teams that just, maybe it's not as pronounced as it used to be, but there's just certain teams that beat other teams. It doesn't matter how good or bad, and it's like across every sport. Like I would say the Steelers always beat the Indianapolis Colts. It doesn't matter who their quarterback is, coach, whatever. And I can't say like the Patriots always beat the Steelers. It doesn't matter. Well, in the history of hockey, for some reason, the Penguins beat the Capitals every time. It doesn't matter what happens, who's going, who's there, how good the Capitals are, how bad the Penguins are. The Penguins always beat the Capitals. Now, the Capitals reversed that a little bit a couple years ago, and when they finally won their cup. But it's just over historically, it's been definitely one-sided Pittsburgh Penguins. There was a big comeback. They were down 3-1 in the 90s on one of their cup runs.
Yep.
And two, Gonchar was a lifelong Capital and had never won a cup with them. So there was some, definitely crossover. There was a rivalry between Ovechkin and Crosby. Never mind, Ovechkin and Malkin. I'm sure there's some rivalry too. Who's the best Russian player. But definitely for whatever reason, the Capitals just, especially in Washington, they just don't do well. When Pittsburgh comes calling, it's been bad news for them.
Yeah, they played each other in the playoffs so many times in the 90s and early 2000s. And this was the first time sort of in that new era. And you had, like you said, Crosby and Ovechkin. The NHL, they really needed a marquee, like LeBron versus Steph Curry or Magic versus Bird.
Yeah, this was their, that.
Yeah, they needed that. Yeah. And so the national hype coming into the series was, oh, here we go, Crosby versus Ovechkin. These are the two star players of the generation. They're going to play each other in this series. And so there was a lot of hype around that. And Game 2, it really lived up to that because in Game 2, both of those players had hat tricks. So you're seeing the two best players in hockey really play at their best. Unfortunately for the Penguins, so if you're watching that as an unbiased fan, that's some good hockey. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, if you're a Penguins fan, the Capitals won those first 2 games, and now we're down 0-2 heading into Game 3. In Game 3, The Capitals tie the game late and send the game into overtime. And it's funny, anytime, I think any team that's ever won a championship, not any team, but there's a lot of teams where you can look at one moment in their season where if that result would have gone differently, would they have won a championship? And I think for this team, for that 2009 Penguin team, it was this Game 3 overtime, because if the Capitals score the next goal there and we're down 0-3, that's the series.
Yeah,
that's the
it's
season.
pretty historic. Yeah, you're not
It's
probably
over.
coming back.
You're
from
not
that.
coming back. So that was it. And Chris Letang off of a face-off from the blue line scores in overtime for the Penguins to win the game, to get them back into the series. And now the momentum shifts. The Penguins win Game 4, and then Game 5 in Washington goes into overtime. And this time Malkin, it's a controversial play because if you watch the replay of the Game 5 overtime goal, everybody's booing before Malkin scores because they wanted a penalty on the Penguins, but they didn't call it. Malkin skates down. He tries to center a pass. I believe Crosby was on the ice. Whoever he tried to center it to, though, the Washington defenseman tried to dive, and when he dove, he knocked it into his net. And so the Penguins win Game 5. Now they're up 3-2, heading back to Pittsburgh. And so now, first, all this momentum goes to Washington. Now it's back to Pittsburgh for Game 6. Game 6 goes into overtime. And this time, David Steckel, who years later becomes infamous for basically knocking Crosby out for two whole seasons in the Winter Classic. But David Steckel, pre-infamy fame, scores the overtime winner. So you're going into Game 7 with 3 of the last 4 games going into overtime, the 2 best players in the world playing at their best, all this back and forth momentum shift. So you just figure Game 7 in Washington is going to be this epic, huge, memorable game.
And it really, I guess it was memorable from the Penguins fan.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the big moment that set the tone early was Ovechkin gets a breakaway early and Fleury absolutely stones him. I mean, that seemed like, then the Penguins scored a couple more goals after that, and that seemed to be that put Washington in its place there. They never really recovered after your best player got stopped on a breakaway. They just could never recover the momentum. And it is weird that there was such a back and forth series, and finally, the final momentum swing was to the Penguins on that breakaway by Ovechkin. Fleury coming up with a big save, or Ovechkin, because maybe if Ovechkin scores that goal there, maybe they go on to win 6-2. So
Right. It was a big moment. It was a big save.
But they're the Capitals, and they're not going to beat the Penguins, so it doesn't even matter. I hate to say it, but it just seems like, I don't know why. It's like maybe it's psychological or whatever.
Well, like you said,
it's like not like Alexander Ovechkin in Russia cared in 1990. That it just doesn't make any sense. It's hard to wrap your head around. Yeah.
And like you said, when they won the Cup, they did overcome it that year. So who knows if that's if that really got them over the horse. But in this case, yeah, at that point especially, it was just the way it always went for the Capitals versus the Penguins, and to have that kind of a series, back and forth, overtime games, and the final of Game 7 was 6-2, and it wasn't even that close. I feel like 6-2 wasn't.
No,
indicative.
they thoroughly dominated.
Yeah, I mean, it was over by the middle of the second period, and in Washington. So now the Penguins. So they dispatched the Capitals, which was a big deal.
That was a big series for round 2.
Right.
That was probably one of the marquee playoff rounds in that playoffs.
Absolutely was. And the third round almost feels like a letdown because they're playing the Carolina Hurricanes for the conference finals. And Carolina was kind of an odd story. They were a little bit of a Cinderella team. They had won the Cup 3 or 4 years earlier, so they weren't like a no-name team. But that year they were the 6th seed. They weren't that good, but they took out 2 division champions. They took out New Jersey and Boston. And in the Boston series, that was a real back and forth series. That there was a lot of controversy in that series where Scotty Walker for Carolina had knocked out Aaron Ward for the Bruins, and everybody in Boston wanted him suspended. And he ended up playing Game 7 and scored the overtime goal that ended the Bruins season. So Carolina had just been through this very much of a roller coaster series, similar to the Penguins. And when we played the Capitals, the big fear was Ovechkin. I mean, they had this great, not just Ovechkin, their whole offense with Semin and all their other great players that they had.
They had Backstrom.
Backstrom, yeah. They had a great offense, and so you were just afraid of them scoring goals. Carolina, I mean, they had Eric Stahl, they had some good players, but really the big fear with Carolina was Cam Ward, their goaltender. He was really the reason they had won the Stanley Cup several years earlier. And the Penguins, there are a handful of great Penguins teams, 93, 96. I can think of a handful of examples where great Penguin teams ran into a hot goaltender, and that was it. That just stopped them dead in their tracks.
Yeah, goaltending in hockey is the great equalizer. It really is.
Yep.
And but it ended up this was the easy series of all of them. Is what happened was the Hurricanes had no answer for Malkin. I mean, their second, whoever they were pairing against him, he absolutely shredded, and he shredded Cam Ward too. But this is probably the best I've ever seen Malkin play, I would guess. I mean, just from an offensive standpoint, he was unbelievable. And I mean, they took care of the Hurricanes, no problem. That wasn't even a series, quite honestly.
It was a sweep. Malkin had the goal in Game 2 that completed a hat trick where he had the no look. He flipped it over his shoulder basically into the net. It was one of those you remember where you were kind of goals. And yeah, they just dominate. The biggest story out of that series was in Game 4. So Carolina at their arena, they had some kind of siren that they sounded before.
Yeah,
the game.
I've been to that arena. Yeah, they have.
Okay.
They have a siren.
Okay.
They ring it because it's like a hurricane warning because of the hurricane.
Oh.
And then they play "Rock You by a Hurricane" by the Scorpions, which is it's a great entrance. It is a great entrance. Having been to a hockey game in Carolina.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know what that was. I just remember that.
It's fine. Yeah, I went to a Penguins Carolina game
Okay.
several years later. Yeah,
That's good context.
in Raleigh. Yeah,
Because I didn't know what it was. What I remember is the Game 4.
They have different. It's like the flag in Seattle, or
They have
like
a celebrity or
yeah,
a
local
special
celebrity.
guest.
Yeah.
So do you remember who sounded the siren?
Yeah, Bill Cowher, because he went. It's in Raleigh. They're in Raleigh, and he went to NC State, and him and his wife, his former wife, they both lived in. I think they still do live in North Carolina. She doesn't, but he does. Still lives in Carolina, and so he would ring the siren, and I guess that was controversial because how dare you betray the Pittsburgh? Who, they're like, okay, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it was one of those overblown.
How dare you go to your vacation home and
Right.
do people get mad that he lives in New York now? How dare you go to Central Park, go to Point State Park?
It was one of those overblown Pittsburgh fan controversies.
It's like we're winning 3-0. Let's make something out of nothing. Yeah.
Well, and like you said, that was the easy series. That the fact that was the biggest story meant that it wasn't much of a series, and so they went in 4 games. And the interesting thing, so after Game 4. They wheel out the Prince of Wales Trophy, which is what they give to the Eastern Conference champion. And typically, when you get the Prince of Wales Trophy, you don't touch it. That's the superstition, because it's not the trophy you want to win. You want to win the cup. And so the previous year, when they won the Prince of Wales Trophy in Philadelphia, or against Philadelphia, they wheeled it out. Crosby stood next to it, took a picture, and they all skated off the ice. Didn't touch it. And then, of course, they lost. So Crosby, who's superstitious, very superstitious, this time he goes up to the Prince of Wales Trophy. He picks it up. He literally hoists it over his head.
There's a more context. When the Penguins won their back-to-back cups, Mario and them had touched the Prince of Wales Trophy.
Okay.
So I think Mario it's just
Just touch it. It'll be all right.
Maybe they could have had the Prince of Wales come out and handed it to whoever that person is at that point in time.
I'm sure the Prince of Wales was busy doing important Prince of Wales kinds of things.
I don't, Harry, William.
I don't know either. But so now, right? So now he touches it, and in the 2 times subsequently in 16 and 17 when they won it again, he did the same thing, because every time he touched it, they ended up winning the cup, and the one time he didn't touch it, they lost. So now, I think.
Well, that's definitely the reason they won that year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, but I think 20 years from now, if the Penguins get back to that point,
It's definitely they're going to be
you're going to have to pick that trophy up because it's just a franchise tradition.
What a great name for a trophy too, the Prince of Wales.
That is.
What's the
great name for a
Western
trophy.
Conference? Is it still the Campbell? Is it
Clarence Campbell. Yeah.
It's still Claire. Now he's a hockey guy. Like they just
right.
yeah.
I don't.
It's just like they just picked a random royal.
Yeah, we could do
what is the Duke of Edinburgh taking that?
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast about weird Canadian trophy names and weird Canadian English royalty associations.
No Lady Bing.
Why the Queen's on their money and stuff like that. But anyway, we digress. So meanwhile, the Penguins are back in the finals, and meanwhile in the Western Conference, it's Detroit. Detroit's storming their way through, and Detroit
with their Campbell trophy. And I don't know whether they touched the Campbell.
I don't know whether they touched it or not.
Maybe Zetterberg did.
I'm sure they did whatever they had done the previous year. So they win the West. So now, oh my gosh, here we are, Stanley Cup Finals, the same two teams a year later. Detroit basically has the same team plus Hossa, so they're even better. The Penguins have gone through a lot of change, different coach and everything else, but they're back. They sort of take a different path back to the finals. But regardless, here we are, the same two teams back in the finals. And the first two games were in Detroit, just like they were the previous year. And the previous year, the first two games were shutouts. Detroit shut out Pittsburgh in both of those first two games. And that's when you really started to realize that we weren't up to snuff. This second time around, they were a lot closer. The Penguins are competitive in those first two games. They get some bad bounces. The Joe Louis Arena was infamous for the weird bounces
off
the boards.
Yeah, they were really like springy.
Super springy, super weird. So there were some bad bounces, and the Penguins lose the first two games, and you're kind of thinking, okay, man, we look better. We seem like maybe we can hang with this team this year, but after two games, it's the same exact result. We're down.
And the odds,
0-2.
I think in the final, the odds are like, if you win the first two games, it's something like 70% you win the cup.
Right.
So the odds are, and this is kind of the I think a theme of this series is the odds are against the Penguins the rest of the way. They really, really, pulled an upset here because in all reality, Detroit probably should have won this series.
Well, think about the math. You win the first two games. That means there's 5 games left.
And you only have to win two.
The other team has to win 4 out of 5.
Yeah.
For if you're down 0-2, you have to win 4 out of the last 5. You can only lose one more time, and
that means you got to win on the road twice.
Right.
Yeah, because they had the home ice. Yeah,
right.
They would have to win.
Right. The thing I'll always remember about Game 2, when Game 2 ended, they played, and every time I hear this song, I'll always think of Game 2. At the Joe Louis Arena, they played "Living on a Prayer" by Bon Jovi. And do you know why they played that song?
Because the Penguins were living on a prayer?
No, because, we're halfway there.
Okay.
They had won the first two games. They were halfway to 4 games. And
repeating as Stanley Cup champions.
Yes.
That's lost, too, is they were about to and no team had repeated since the Red Wings had done it in the late 90s.
Right, and this was the salary cap era, which was harder to repeat.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal for them. But yeah, every time I still hear that song, and I still think of how I felt really angry because it was like I couldn't believe we were right back in that same spot, being down 0-2 after everything that had happened, after the great run we had put together, after everything we went through, and the Capital Series and the coaching change, and we're down 0-2, and they're.
This is what's funny. This isn't even the low part of the series. This isn't it. And moving on to Game 3, when was the Jordan Staal goal? Was that game?
That was Game 4. So
yeah.
Game 3 is back at home, and the Mellon Arena, and the Penguins win Game 3. But to me that wasn't a big deal because the previous year they did the same thing. They lost Games 1 and 2. They won Game 3. Game 4 was the big one because
Detroit's just trying to win 1 out of 2.
Yes,
there.
Absolutely.
You're not in trouble till you lose at home. That's the saying. Yeah,
exactly. And so when the Red Wings won Game 4 in Pittsburgh,
you're in trouble. Yeah,
and went up 3-1. That was virtually. I mean, that was really, in all honesty, the end of the series. We said that they sort of eked out a 6-game with a triple overtime win, but really that was when the series ended. So now, in 2009, the big game is Game 4. If we can win Game 4, then the script is completely flipped from the previous year. And so to your point, Steve, that was the game where that game, Osgood and Fleury, the first period, both make some big saves. In the second period, Detroit's up 2-1, and they get back-to-back power plays. Malkin goes to the box, and then at the very end of that penalty, there's like 2 seconds left. The Penguins kill the penalty. Malkin's about to come back onto the ice, and Brooks Orpik is called for tripping. And so now Detroit's going to have a 3-minute and 58-second power play. And this is really the series here. I mean, 3 minutes and 58 seconds.
I remember at the time, in this plays in Jordan Staal, he comes up huge here.
He does, because it's not only so if Detroit scores and goes up 3-1 in the game, they probably win the game. Detroit, once they had a lead, they were hard to come back on.
Well, they would play possession and play keep away.
They were a really good, well coached team, and
their offense too was weird. Like they didn't have like a ton of like skating skill. It seemed like their offense was to stand in front of the net, if I remember correctly, and shoot pucks at you until it bounced off something and went in.
Right. Right. So
was that Abdicator or
they just had guys that
did like big oafs that would just like literally sit on your goal, eh?
Well, one of their big oafs. So as their Penguins were desperately trying to kill off this 4-minute power play, Malkin actually got a breakaway, and he's skating down the ice, and this big horse, Johan Franzen, that they had, just this massive horse of a player. Hauls down Malkin on a breakaway, and you're like, okay, well, fine. Now that'll even things out at least. And they call nothing. And so now Detroit's still on a power play. Everybody's screaming, booing, and that's where Jordan Staal makes, like you said, Steve. I think
he just has this beautiful breakaway goal, and I mean, not that Jordan Staal was like this amazing offensive player, but he had a nice little power move. He just kind of slides across and puts it right over Osgood, and boy, at that point, I thought they're going to win. Yeah. They're going to win because that was such a turn. It was like, okay, Detroit's not just going to like run away with this. We're going to win. Yep. At least until Game 5, I thought that.
Well, yeah. So the Staal goal, the Staal goal tied it. Crosby gets a goal 2 minutes later because it just shifted the momentum. Like Detroit had a 4-minute power play, and they not only didn't get a goal, they got scored on a shorthanded goal. And the Penguins just came back and won that game. And so, like you said, now we're going to Detroit.
It was 2-2, and Game 5 is always a pivotal game in any 7-game series.
Yep.
And you thought, okay, Game 5, if you can pull this out, you only got to win one in Detroit. I'd rather win Game 5 than Game 7 because normally road Game 7s don't go well for you. And so you thought you got to win Game 5.
Well, and all the momentum was in our favor. We just won 2 games in a row. We'd had that great Game 4 with a shorthanded goal. Everybody's excited. Going to Detroit, and it's disastrous.
Price is Right fail buzzer. Yeah, I mean, they literally, it could have been a lot more than 5-0 probably. Fleury got smoked. Yeah, that was probably one of Fleury's not good, worst performances of his career.
It was bad.
It was ugly.
They pulled Fleury out of the game. They lost 5-0. The offense couldn't score anything. The other thing that was key for this game was Pavel Datsyuk.
Yeah, came back.
Yeah, that was. I mean, he had not played in that series. He was hurt, and he was arguably their best player, next to Lidstrom and Zetterberg. But he came back for that game. So now all the momentum. So now it's Game 6 back in
and they're pretty much in the same situation as they were the year before.
Yeah, I mean, again, a different path to get there, certainly, but Detroit's up 3-2, and now, once again, has a chance to hoist the cup at our building. But this time things go a little differently. Jordan Staal scored early, and then in the third period, it was a very close game. Tyler Kennedy,
unbelievable.
Who, if I remember, Tyler Kennedy.
Look at the people who scored in this. This is crazy. Like Jordan Staal, Tyler Kennedy. This isn't exactly Crosby and Malkin area.
Crosby had the goal in Game 4, and I think that was his only goal of the series. And that's. I mean, go back to even the '90s teams. You had like the Troy Loneys and the Bob Eries. Like, I think any team like this, you need the role players. And Tyler Kennedy, he was a frustrating player. He was that guy that shot the puck every time he had the puck. He just shoot, and most of the time he.
Well, that should make Penguins fans happy.
Well, yeah, he was well liked probably for that, but he didn't. He wasn't a very good shot. This night he was. He gave the Penguins a 2-0 lead with 14 minutes left in the game, and one of the gut-wrenching things about playoff hockey is to have a lead, and you're watching the clock just tick down slowly. And in this game, the Red Wings got one of those goals back with 12 minutes left. And so for the last 12 minutes,
it was rough, yeah.
it's just an onslaught by the other team. And again, the Red Wings were a really good offensive
Well,
team.
they would keep possession anyway, like I said. But I think they didn't quite have the skating, but then they would, like you said, what happened, like, yeah, I see in our notes, Scuderi. I remember Scuderi making a save, like with his skate, because he was in the crease. And if he would have put his hand on the puck, it would have been a penalty shot. So he couldn't, like, Scuderi was in, like, that's one of those iconic, like, that's up there with the Peter Angelo save, like that moment in Penguins history where, like, he just literally, it's like a kick save and a beauty. I mean, Rob Scuderi saved the day. And another role player, I mean, Rob Scuderi wasn't exactly, Sergei Gonchar here.
Yeah, you talk about the role players. Yeah, Scuderi was one of those guys. He had been with the Penguins organization a long time. He was on some of those really bad teams earlier in the decade, and he made two big plays. Earlier in that period, there was a loose puck in the crease, and he cleared it out of there. And then, like you said, in the final seconds, somehow Fleury got out of position, and the crease was wide open, and Scuderi, like you said, with his leg, saves it.
Well, it was just Detroit was just piling people into the. I mean, it was
Yep.
like you said, it was an onslaught. They were just throwing everything in the kitchen sink at them.
So the Penguins hang on, and I'll always remember the Mike Lang quote at the end of that game. The game ends, and Mike Lang said, "I'll meet you in the schoolyard, baby, for all the marbles Friday night in Detroit." That was
I remember that. Yeah.
Game 6 was a Tuesday. Game 7 was scheduled for Friday, a Friday night, and he said, "I'll meet you for all the marbles on Friday night." And so now, again, different script than the previous year. Now we're going to a Game 7.
A finals Game 7. They don't happen all that often, but just for some context, Game 7s in sports that play 7-game series to decide their championship, that will be basketball, hockey, baseball. At that point in time in 2009, since 1979, no road team had won on the road. So the Penguins had a lot of history going against them. Like all the other, there may be 3 or 4, and that's in every sport: basketball, baseball, hockey. They had won. Carolina had won. I think somebody in baseball had won. In some basketball, I think the Spurs had won at home. So they really had a lot of significant. And you know who the team in 1979 who won a Game 7 on the road?
Pirates at Baltimore?
That would be, your Pittsburgh Pirates beating the We Are Family Pirates.
Yeah.
Now, it's been done since then. It's been kind of weird. It's been done 2 or 3 times.
Okay, but up until that point.
And up until 2009, I think Boston did it to Vancouver in hockey, and Chicago beat Cleveland. I think that was, Chicago. The Cubs beat the Indians for their first one.
Okay.
And I think Cleveland again. Well, not Cleveland. Cleveland beat Golden State in Golden State.
Okay.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen all that often.
Well, at that point, that was 30 years. You're talking 30 years, 79 to 2009. So 30-year span where that had never happened.
Yeah, so it's not common, and it's hard to do.
Wow. Well, that's impressive. That's like you said earlier, the odds this whole season and this whole postseason were really against the Penguins. And that was 2 series where they had gone down 0-2. So twice they had to come back from that, and this is another Game 7 on the road. And Mario, he sent a text the morning of the game. He had mulled this over. He wanted to send a text to the team, and the text he sent was, "Play without fear, and you'll be successful. See you at center ice, Mario." And he said later on that he just wanted to give them this vision of standing at center ice, all gathered together, raising the cup. And a lot of the players said it really inspired them.
Yeah, you gotta. That's a leader there. That's Mario, guy you want in charge of your. I hope he never sells the team, but yeah, he's been a great owner, and compared to a lot of the other owners the Penguins have had throughout their history, he's definitely been the most successful.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Not a very high bar to meet, but yes,
Yeah.
he's an all-time Pittsburgher, and that text message really inspired the team. So they go into this game 7. The first period scoreless, a lot of back and forth, but it's scoreless. And in the second period, the Penguins get the first goal from Max Talbot. It's a turnover deep in Detroit territory, and a pass in front of the net, and Talbot scores. And then the second goal, Talbot's kind of racing down the left boards, and Chris Osgood, who was a really good goaltender, veteran goaltender for Detroit, kind of gets out of position, and Talbot beats him on a slap shot. And so Max Talbot, of all people,
They're up 2-0.
scores 2 goals in the second period. And now you're going into the third period up 2-0. And just like we talked about with Game 6, it is a gut-wrenching feeling.
I remember I was with my brother-in-law, and we were watching this at his house, and I said, please don't turn this into a 20-minute power play for the Red Wings. And what did the Penguins do? They turned it into a 20-minute power play. That's basically what the third period was.
It was prevent defense.
It was the
basically.
Red Wings, I think, maybe were on the other side of their own red line for maybe 2 minutes.
Right.
I mean, if that.
Right. Well, and it's one of those things too where, like, there's, I don't know, 15 minutes and 30 seconds left. And then you sit there and you watch back and forth. You watch the Red Wings take 8 shots and their saves, and they clear the puck and there's a whistle. And you look back at the clock and now there's like 15:26. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
4 seconds? There was like a million things that happened. So the clock just moves so slowly.
And I don't remember what the rule was back then. Was that when you could ice the puck and still make a line change? I think they still had that back then.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But yeah, because now you can't do that because
Right.
like you end up scoring because you just can't.
People
get tired, yeah. But then it was like, okay, just ice the puck and we'll get some fresh people out here. So I think that probably played into it. Where it's like, ooh, just throw it down there,
The other thing that happened was Crosby had gotten hurt in the second period, and he tried to come out and skate. He couldn't put any pressure on. I believe it was his ankle, and so they played the whole third period without their captain. Not that they were, like, to your point, they weren't trying to necessarily score goals, but just moving the puck without, arguably your best puck mover, it really led to just an onslaught by Detroit. And
there's always been a thing that European players don't play defense or don't like to play defense. Malkin played great defense.
He did.
What he did to Zetterberg, had to know what gum Malkin was chewing by the end of that game, to quote Hoosiers. I mean, he was unbelievably good in his defensive zone time. And maybe that's, one of the reasons he has a few more cups than a guy that might wear number 8,
True.
I mean, that performance in that third period by Malkin really, really carried the team.
He did. And so the nice thing was they had a 2-goal lead, and Detroit's going to get one, which they did at the 13:53 mark. So that was good because they went the whole first almost 14 minutes without giving up a goal. Eriksson gets a goal. Now it's 2-1. Okay, now you got to kill off the last 8 minutes of the game. And the thing that everybody will remember, and we'll talk about it here in a minute, is the save on Nicholas Lidstrom in the final seconds of the game. But honestly, the thing I remember was with 2:15 left, Nicholas Kronwall took a slap shot from the blue line, and it rang off the crossbar.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And the Joe Louis Arena where the Red Wings played at the time was an old arena, and the camera, you always saw like the tops of everybody's heads.
Yeah.
Because it was sort of like this.
Yeah, people would stand, yeah.
So when that rang off the crossbar, everybody stood up and raised their arms, and you're watching it on TV, and you just hear cling, and everybody jumps up in front of the camera, and your heart just like sinks because it's a goal. It's a goal. Everybody jumped up, cling.
And I'm sure Doc didn't get excited. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that moment, I felt like I came out of my body in that moment. Like it probably took years off of my life. I just hit the floor. And then, Doc Emerson, hit the crossbar. And I just was like, and that was the moment I remember as just being like, okay, Okay, let's all take a breath. And then, of course, at the end, you want to
Well,
talk about what
Fleury
happens at the
Fleury
end.
rubbed the crossbar, thanking it, which has become like I guess his tradition now because Fleury's kind of a character and a goofball. But yeah, I guess you have to be to play goalie in that league. And that was fun. And the save, with I think was there 5 seconds left, and they had a face
They
off.
had a face-off, which they won.
And it was Stahl. I think it was
Yeah.
Stahl. They were their best face-off guy, and I remember saying, just sit on him, just tackle him.
Yeah.
Don't even try and win the puck. Just tackle.
But
whoever.
they didn't. They got,
no, they won.
Detroit got the puck.
Detroit won the draw.
Yeah.
I think maybe clean.
Clean, yes.
Yeah,
Totally clean.
and it was on the right side, so they passed it to the left, and it went right to Lindstrom, one of their best defensive player and a pretty good offensive player, I think.
Well, yeah,
too.
arguably the best defenseman in the history of the league. I mean,
Yeah.
top 3, definitely. Yeah.
And he has the whole side of the net to work with like 2 seconds left to send it into overtime and continue this great run Detroit's had trying to go back to back. And Fleury makes one of those moments that should be probably like, remember there used to be a mural of like Pittsburgh, they tore the building down, but like Mazeroski, and it was they should remake that with that. That would be one of the modern moments. Fleury slides across and makes an unbelievable save and becomes an absolute Pittsburgh legend at that moment. And the puck goes to the corner and time runs out, and the Penguins are Stanley Cup champions, and probably one of the more improbable, not just runs to even make the playoffs, but improbable finals run. I mean, to be, like you said, to be down so many times with your backs against the wall, it was unreal. It was unreal. And it was a great save. And boy, Fleury, what a player, and couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And it was in Detroit, and for Detroit's perspective, to be that close to to repeat. I mean, they were that close to repeating. I mean, literally a Game 7 in your building.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
It was a special season, I think, because of what had transpired, not only the previous season, but all the stuff that led up to that, all the bad times.
And then Hossa, everybody was all happy with Hossa sitting on the bench, all sad,
Losing Hossa and then watching him. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people in Pittsburgh hold ill will towards Hossa. I really don't. But I have to admit, that shot of him on the bench, it was satisfying. Yeah. He was just had his head down and watching the Penguins raise the Stanley Cup, realizing that he could have been part of that, and he chose poorly. And so the Penguins hoist the cup. Sidney Crosby is 21 years old, and he's already brought the Stanley Cup to Pittsburgh. Just an amazing turnaround for the franchise, for the city. And, it was a great team. Like we said, a bunch of great role players.
Mark Eaton, Delaware.
Yeah, I mean,
I forgot about Mark Eaton. Yeah.
Mark Eaton, Miroslav Slatan. Even like Philippe Boucher had a big goal in the Carolina series. I mean, guys that, you'd never really remember, but guys that were really key. Craig Adams was another one. Just a lot of great role players. And to me, I remember thinking, that was June of 2009. In February of 2009, the Steelers had beaten the Cardinals in Super Bowl 43 on the last-second touchdown. And so within 4 months of each other, my two favorite pro sports teams had won championships in dramatic fashion. And I just thought, this is the pinnacle. I don't know in the rest of my lifetime if it will ever get better.
I think the Phillies won the World Series that year too. So all three in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I just thought, it'll never get better than this. How could you possibly beat that than having the defending?
Well, I remember Malkin after the game say, "It's up to you, Pirates."
Which they promptly did not respond to. But yeah, that was a really great time, a great season. Memorable in so many ways.
And you thought it would be the start of more, which it really ended up not being. I mean, they kind of fell apart after that. Bylsma just could never. There were a lot of, like you said, Crosby was hurt for a couple years. Bylsma had a pretty good year the one year he didn't have Crosby and Malkin, and they still made the playoffs, but you just kind of felt they even fell short that year. But no, they just never able to recapture that until recently when they changed coaches again.
And general managers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that whole era kind of shifted into a new regime and new players. And so you're right, that was kind of the last gasp for that.
That was the
group.
high water mark of Ray Shiro and Dan Baalsma,
Yep.
really.
Yep.
I mean, Baalsma really, he's not even coaching anymore.
Yeah. I mean, but I think he'll always have a special place in Penguins history because.
Well, even Terrian stayed in Pittsburgh after that, and he kind of still, I think, has a soft spot for Pittsburgh, and he coached a lot of them players. And
A fun fact about the Penguins is they've won 5 Stanley Cups, and 3 of them, the 92, 2009, 2016, all 3 of those cups were won with interim head coaches. So,
well, one was kind of under extenuating circumstances.
Bowman was still in it. He was not the head coach that year.
That's like getting Bill Belichick as your intern head coach. You do realize
I
that?
got you.
Yeah.
Fact remains.
Yeah.
All 3 were interim head
Let's go
coaches.
get a Hall of Fame coach. What other sport could you let's go get a Hall of Fame coach. He's available.
So they won with an interim head coach. Yeah, Baalsma, like you said, got rewarded with a long-term deal after the season. Never was able to match that, but still has that in his back pocket that he's a Stanley Cup winning coach, and a memorable time for the team. Any other thoughts on this one, Steve, before we wrap it up?
Fun one to watch. Always fun to see Detroit lose, I guess. I don't know why that team rubbed me the wrong way, the Red Wings. I just felt they had no skill. It just drove me nuts that their whole offense was sitting in front of a goalie. Sorry.
Well, they were. Yeah, I mean, they were.
And they had like Zetterberg and Datsuk are good players. It's just I don't know why. I don't know. And then Babcock.
Their coach was not likable, Mike Babcock. I mean, he had that perfect hair. And, it was a team that you.
It was
you
a fun
enjoyed
villain.
beating.
They were a fun villain, and it was great to see the Penguins kind of win. I wish they would have, been able to replicate that a little earlier than they did. But good win for the Penguins against all odds, and what a great season, and for them.
Yeah, fun looking back on it. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. Please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Pittsburgh Sports Memories. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.